China has officially sealed the deal to dominate Canada's economy with a massive $320 billion agreement, shocking the entire world, especially the Trump administration. This is not just an ordinary trade deal, it marks a strategic turning point, signaling a worrying withdrawal of the United States from an important ally. As the global landscape shifts rapidly, the pressing question is, where will the US stand in this new power game? It happened in May 25. The news stunned the entire American financial world. China unexpectedly overtook the United States to become the largest buyer of Canadian oil, right as the Trans Mountain Pipeline, valued at $34 billion, officially started operating. This was not just an ordinary trade deal. The oil and gas cooperation between China and Canada is projected to reach $320 billion by. What's striking is that this enormous volume of trade should have belonged to the US, Canada's closest trading partner for decades. But now, it no longer does. So why did Canada turn its back? It all began when the Trump administration imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian oil imports in an effort to pressure allies into taking a harder stance against China. Instead of giving in, Canada quietly withdrew from America's playbook and turned directly toward Asia. The result? Oil from Alberta no longer flows south to refineries in Texas. Instead, it is transported westward, loaded onto ships at British Columbia, and sent straight to Shanghai. In other words, while the US was trying to isolate China from the global energy market, China was quietly stepping into Washington's backyard and turning it into its own strategic fueling station. Canada's turnaround required no loud speeches or public condemnations. They simply changed the pipeline route, and suddenly the entire power balance shifted. The US thought that by applying pressure, it would tighten its grip on China. But in reality, that tariff became the push that drove Canada straight into Beijing's arms. And as the oil began flowing east instead of south, the world started to see clearly. China is not just buying oil, they are buying the whole network of relationships. There are battles that don't need guns, just oil pipelines. And China is leading the way in this fight. They don't shout slogans or make headlines every day. Beijing quietly does one thing. It shifts the flow of global energy towards itself. At the beginning of 2025, everything changed rapidly. China increased its oil purchases from Canada by 870% in just 4 months, while cutting oil imports from the United States by 68%. A stunning pivot that Washington couldn't react to in time. Why Canada? Because China took advantage of new infrastructure. The expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline project, capable of transporting nearly 900,000 barrels of oil daily, with an investment of $34 billion. Originally built to help Canada diversify its exports, it has now become a strategic pipeline, delivering oil directly to China, bypassing the US. But that's not all. China also signed major contracts with the liquefied natural gas project in British Columbia, which has a massive capacity of 14 million tons per year, all destined for China. This move made China the most powerful buyer in Canada's oil and gas sector, replacing the US. So, how will America respond when it realizes it has burned bridges too soon? The answer lies ahead. Who is losing influence due to a misstep? China isn't just buying oil for consumption. It's playing a big strategic game, with every barrel carefully calculated. Previously, China relied heavily on oil from Russia and Venezuela, two countries sanctioned by the West, putting Beijing in a vulnerable position during geopolitical shifts. Now, China is pivoting to Canada, a stable, resource-rich country that also has tensions with the US. When the US imposed tariffs on Canadian oil, Beijing quickly seized the opportunity to step into the position Washington once held. Gradually, the global energy order is being redrawn. The US, once Canada's largest partner, is being pushed out, while China moves in deeper, not just buying oil but building trust and long-term partnerships. What's most striking? China accomplishes all this without threats or pressure. Just money, long-term contracts, and a bit of diplomatic finesse. A soft strategy with surprisingly powerful results. In America's Midwest, the soybean fields were once a source of pride. Farmers there made good money from every ton shipped to China. But now everything has changed. In just 1 year, the US soybean market share in China plummeted from 40% to 18%. It's not because American farmers got worse. It's because China turned away and shifted to Brazil and Argentina, which now supply 74% of China's soybeans. Prices followed the drop. Soybean prices fell by 17%, wheat lost 9% of its value, and the pork industry collapsed before it even knew what hit it, as Europe increased pork exports to China by 35%, pushing American products out on every front. Washington poured money into saving farmers, with aid totaling $122 billion, including $7.7 billion for soybean growers alone. But even with cash flowing in, trust had vanished. According to the American Farm Bureau, 2025 became the year with the highest farm bankruptcies in a decade, hitting Iowa and Illinois hardest, two states that are America's agricultural heartland. Joseph W. Glauber, former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, didn't mince words. This is no longer just a trade dispute. This is a liquidity crisis, drowning the entire American farming system. The U.S. lost its biggest market. Farmers lost their reliable buyers. In China, they just switched to other suppliers. And they're not turning back. Once, American corporations viewed China as a gold mine. A huge population, strong consumer demand, a prize everyone wanted a piece of. But by 2025, the picture had changed, and it wasn't golden anymore. After losing the crucial Chinese market, American farmers face an unprecedented crisis. Soybean prices crashing, massive aid unable to save many farms, and soaring bankruptcy rates reaching alarming levels. But the damage isn't limited to agriculture. The closing door of the Chinese market doesn't just knock American farm goods out, it also pushes major tech companies and large enterprises into uncharted struggles. Take Qualcomm, the chip giant. Two major contracts vanished in 2025, not due to poor quality, but because China pushed hard for domestic chip production, developing and supplying itself, and America got pushed out. Apple, the symbol of American technology, is also struggling. Its market share in China dropped below 10%, the lowest in 5 years. This is no small matter. 16% of Apple's revenue comes from China, meaning losing market share there cuts deeply into its global vitality. General Motors, once king of the Chinese car market, saw sales plunge by 28% from 2022 to 2025, a painful nosedive. In the chip sector, Qualcomm isn't the only casualty. AMD and Nvidia, two top players, were caught in the storm too. Together, they lost about $4.3 billion in potential contract value as China's market door slowly closed. And then there's Walmart, seemingly unrelated but deeply involved. Walmart's pressure on Chinese suppliers to deal with U.S. tariffs sparked backlash from Beijing, even dragging diplomatic tensions into the mix. From technology to retail, from cars to processors, China is no longer the promised land for American businesses. The once wide-open door is gradually closing, and no one knows when or if it will open again. After a series of shocks that caused the U.S. to lose markets, weaken its influence, and even lose longtime allies, the most obvious consequence isn't just direct economic damage, it's a profound shift in how global trade operates. Facing this reality, China didn't choose to confront head-on. Instead, it developed a new strategy, a strategy of diversifying supply sources, restructuring global supply chains, and creating a fragmented trade system. This is where we begin to see how Beijing turns challenges into opportunities. China's market, once one of the biggest buyers of American goods, is slowly shutting its doors to U.S. exports. In the first 4 months of 2025, American exports to China dropped by 26.8%, compared to the same period the previous year. This blow has hurt businesses and dragged down U.S. economic growth. First quarter GDP growth in 2025 slowed to just 1.3%. Down sharply from 2.8% in the third quarter of 2024. Trade alone shaved off 0.7 percentage points from growth. Meanwhile, China isn't just cutting back on U.S. imports. It's actively boosting purchases from other countries. Imports from ASEAN nations rose by 21%, while imports from Canada surged by 44%. It's clear China is deliberately diversifying its supply sources, refusing to rely on any single partner. This marks the start of a massive supply chain shift that's causing the U.S. to lose traditional markets and increasing external pressure on the American economy. But the story doesn't stop there. Realizing that direct confrontation with China through tariffs and sanctions isn't working as hoped, Beijing switched to a smarter approach, not loud retaliation, but sustainable replacement. Instead of escalating tensions, China quietly builds a long-term network of alternative suppliers, reducing risks by strengthening economic resilience. Espoir Prasad, a Brookings Institution expert, explains that this is not mere payback. It's a strategic move to ensure China's economic recovery and stability in the long run. This strategy means the US is not only losing markets, but gradually losing its role and influence in the global supply chain. The door for American goods is closing, while China expands new trade relationships, building a more diverse and sustainable economic network. As the strategy of supply chain diversification and fragmented trade begins reshaping the global playing field, China is not just altering the flow of goods, it is also broadening its influence across diplomatic and media fronts. Meanwhile, the US is gradually losing not only markets, but also crucial alliances, triggering profound shifts in the geopolitical and economic landscape. In April 2025, China's ambassador to Canada, Mr. Wang Di, boldly labeled the US an economic bully and openly urged Canada and other nations to stand on the right side of history. This was not mere rhetoric. China launched a systematic diplomatic campaign increasing direct engagement with Canadian provinces, pouring investments into infrastructure projects, and boosting media efforts to portray Beijing as a stable, reliable partner. Roland Paris, an expert from the University of Ottawa, observed that China is targeting the weakest link in the US alliance chain, Canada, where traditional relations face serious challenges. However, Canada is not easily swayed. Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly called China the largest security threat to the nation and imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles to assert a firm stance. Yet interestingly, despite rising tensions in some areas, Canada continues close energy cooperation with Beijing, reflecting a pragmatic choice amid rapidly changing global dynamics. This situation illustrates that the power game is fought not only at negotiation tables, but also through strategic moves, where alliances and influence are being redefined in ways the US did not anticipate. Ultimately, the global trade landscape is being rewritten in unexpected ways, and the US risks being left behind. China is no longer just trading goods or boosting exports of oil and soybeans. It is entering a completely new arena, where power derives not only from physical products, but also from soft power, control over financial platforms, and key currency agreements. This means the real battle ahead will no longer revolve around oil or agriculture, but over who controls the flow of global finance and holds the reins of the world's most critical tools. Matthew Goodman, a specialist at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, states clearly, "The US is falling behind not due to economic weakness, but because of failures in managing alliances and strategic partnerships. What was meant to isolate China through trade wars inadvertently isolated America's own traditional allies, creating a gap Beijing continuously exploits." So, can America change this course? The new power race is heating up, and every move could determine the future of the entire global economy.